While working on a film set last year, I asked members of the cast and crew if they were fans of Kubrick's films. Many of course knew and liked Kubrick, but to my surprise most people there hadn't heard of, let alone seen Barry Lyndon. However, this pattern does not only extend to members of the German film and TV industry, but also to film reviewers and analysts in general. While there's a massive amount of material written about The Shining, 2001: A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, and Eyes Wide Shut, there's hardly anything on Barry Lyndon, despite it still being a beloved film. Since Barry Lyndon is one of my favorite Kubrick films, I took it upon myself to analyze the film. What I expected to find were anti-establishment themes similar to the ones of many of Kubrick's other films. And sure enough, Barry Lyndon also contains such themes. These scenes, for example, reminded me of the prison yard scene in A Clockwork Orange. We see lower class people, soldiers in this case, framed in front of a symbolic pyramid. Note that the soldiers are framed here at the bottom of the pyramid, but still slightly above ordinary people, like in many depictions of feudalism. In this scene, which is entirely an invention of Kubrick, we learn that Fakenham's lover is called Frederick.
How impossibly empty life would be without you, Frederick. Life would be without you, Frederick.
Also note that the next scene starts with the Hohenfriedberger March that was supposedly composed by Frederick himself.
Empty life would be without you, Frederick.
Apart from being just another homoerotic scene in a Kubrick film, I think this scene serves as a send-up for Frederick the Great, who was an alleged homosexual. But while I think that there are anti-establishment themes in Barry Lyndon, I think that another theme is much more prominent, and incidentally also in line with the themes of A Clockwork Orange. Throughout the movie we're presented with a number of father and son relations. First there's Barry and his father, then there's Brady with his sons Mick and Ulick. There is Captain Feeney and Seamus, who's not mentioned in the novel, Sir Charles Lyndon and his son Lord Bullingdon, Barry and his son, Brian, and we're told about the two sons of Lord Wendover.
And what of those excellent boys of yours?
Oh, they're very well. Charles has gone to sea under the protection of Captain Geary on the Ramillies, and John has gone to Oxford to be taught how to preach and pray.
There is also the somewhat paternal relationship between Captain Potzdorff and his uncle. Note that the fathers and sons are very similar to one another. Barry engages in an unnecessary duel like his father, but more on that later. Ulick has the mild temper of Brady.
Now, Dublin is 5 days' ride away from here. There's not a soul who'll know him there. Now,
this is the sort of toast that's drunk a great deal too seldom in my family, and you'll please to receive it with all the honours.
And Mick also seems to owe money to Captain Quinn.
It is not the English way for ladies to have two lovers. And so, Mr. Brady, I'll thank you to pay me the sum you owe me.
Captain Feeney and Seamus are a team of robbers and seem to have a relaxed temper. Potzdorff and his uncle both work for the police and fancy themselves cunning and inquisitive. In the screenplay and novel, we learn that Potzdorff will probably be his uncle's successor as Minister of Police. Sir Charles and Bullingdon are both arrogant, have a public hissy fit, hate Barry from the out, and feel threatened by his presence. Pay attention to the words they're using.
What a pity it is I am not dead for your sake.
I've been given over many times these 4 years, and there was always a candidate or two waiting to apply for the situation.
I will kill you if you lay hands on me ever again.
What are the odds, gentlemen, that I live to see Mr. Barry hang yet?
Will that be all, Mr. Redman Barry?
Good evening, Mr. Barry.
Don't you think he fits my shoes very well, your ladyship?
He wants to step into my shoes. He wants to step into my shoes.
Barry and Brian seem to share the same interests. Both like to fish, fence, ride horses, and play cards.
Will you play cards with me tomorrow?
Of course.
I always thought of Brian as somewhat of a coward though. which would go against my theory, because one definitely cannot think of Barry as a coward when keeping in mind that he rescued Potsdam from a burning building. My main reason for taking Brian for a coward was his statement that he likes to sleep with the candles lit.
Will you keep the candles lit?
Oh, no, Brian. Big boys don't sleep with the candles lit.
But I'm afraid of the dark.
However, this reasoning cannot be upheld considering that he steals away to ride a big horse on his own and that he hits the much bigger Bullingdon during their argument, which is also something Barry does all the time. And what's more, guess who also sleeps with the candles lit? The scene in which Brian says he likes to sleep with the candles lit doesn't appear in the novel, but it is specified that Brian's courage was inherited from his ancestors. Barry's struggle also takes place within this context. With his father being denied his rightful place as an eminent figure in the world by getting himself killed in a duel, Barry seems to symbolically inherit a desire for vicariously achieving great success. This is made quite clear in the novel, in which Barry goes on and on about how he is deserving of a better position because of his noble lineage, and how he's going to restore the fortune of the Barrys, his father's family. Also keep in mind that once Barry fails to get the peerage, he pins all his hope on Brian, to achieve great success instead.
It is impossible to convey what high hopes he had for the boy, and how he indulged in 1,000 fond anticipations as to his future success and figure in the world.
Interestingly, Barry is not the only one in the movie who acts in place of his father. Lord Bullingdon symbolically inherits his father's hate for Barry and manages to get the revenge on him that was denied to Sir Charles. In the book, Bullingdon starts hating Barry once he's mistreating his mother, whereas in the movie, he hates Barry from the out. So the movie seems to be playing at a theme of psychological nativism or determinism here, that also finds expression in the many references to fortune or fate.
How different Barry's fate might have been had he not fallen in love with Nora, and had he not flung the wine in Captain Quinn's face. But he was destined to be a wanderer. But fate did not intend he should remain long an English soldier.
I've spoken to the minister regarding your services, and your fortune is made. We shall get you out of the army, appoint you to the police bureau, and, in time, will allow you to move in a better sphere than that which fortune has hitherto placed you.
But fate had determined that he should leave none of his race behind him.
Nativist themes are also very strongly present in the novel, but there's also another dynamic at play here. Barry spends the first half of the movie being opportunistically attached to a number of father figures. First to his Uncle Brady, then to Captain Grogan, and then to the Chevalier. This is even verbalized in the film.
Redmond, me boy.
Kiss me, my boy.
Don't look so downcast, my boy.
Let me briefly illustrate that this is probably a deliberate pattern. Grogan is the only one in the movie who calls Barry my boy a bunch of times.
The very same one, my boy. Give me a kiss, my dear boy. Now look here, Redmond, my boy.
Brady and the Chevalier only say it once. But in the screenplay, the Chevalier calls Barry my boy a number of times. None of the scenes in which the Chevalier says my boy to Barry in the screenplay made it into the film though. The scene in the movie in which the Chevalier says my boy to Barry was originally written without the gesture in it. So why would Kubrick make such a specific change that on its own doesn't add anything to the scene? Would he not want to strengthen a pattern to emphasize something? But let's go back to Barry's father figures. Throughout the first half of the film, Barry increasingly assumes the roles of his surrogate fathers, first by claiming to be the Esquire of Barryville.
Mr. Quinn can have satisfaction any time he pleases by calling on Redmond Barry, Esquire of Berryville.
Of course, we later learn that he's living on his uncle's land.
And this is the return you make for his kindness? Didn't he harbour you in his house when your father died? Hasn't he given you and your mother rent-free your fine house of Berryville yonder?
Then by posing as an English officer, which is what Grogan is, of course, and finally by impersonating the Chevalier. But Barry is not only molded by his surrogate fathers. His behavior seems to have been shaped by his past experiences also. A beautiful example of this are the scenes with the German girl, who Barry conquers. This encounter is essentially the mirror event of his episode with Nora, in which Barry takes both the roles of Captain Quinn and himself. Like Nora, Lysian is obviously impressed by setting first sight on an English officer. Lysian wears her hair just like Nora, thunder can be heard outside, and the bronze baby has now materialized into a real one. Like Quinn and Nora, Barry and Lysian give each other not entirely serious vows of love, and he waves her goodbye, similarly to how Quinn waved Barry and Nora goodbye. Finally, we learn that Lysian, like Nora, had many other love affairs before.
This heart of Lysian's was like many a neighboring town, and had been stormed and occupied several times before Barry came to invest it.
A girl that's flinging herself at the head of every man in these parts, these 5 years past.
Needless to say that the encounter with Lysian is very different in the novel. Barry's mistreatment of Bullingdon also bears resemblance with his time in the Prussian army. His caning of Bullingdon is reminiscent of the gauntlet scene. First Barry beats Bullingdon, and then he tucks the cane under his arm like he did with the rifle in the gauntlet scene. If we take a close look at Barry's gratification scene, we can see Colonel Bulow doing the same thing. On that point, Brian's behavior of stealing away to ride his horse is described as disobeying Barry's orders.
But I believe Master Brian may have disobeyed your orders and stolen away to Doolan's farm.
Which is incidentally also something that ties Brian to Barry, who also disobeyed orders by stealing away with a horse.
I've never laid a cane on the back of a lord before.
Interestingly, in the novel Barry beats Bullingdon with a horsewhip, not a cane. This is again one of these very specific changes that wouldn't make any sense on their own, was then on something else at play. The empiricist side of the movie is underlined in this line of dialogue.
It's a blessing to see my darling boy has attained a position I always knew was his due, and for which I pinched myself to educate him.
In the novel it is specified that Barry had the idea to gain a title before his mother mentioned it. The novel also...
Oh my god, he's crazy. This guy is so full of it. Oh my god, he's like so annoying. I mean, like, this guy is just unreal. Oh my god, can you believe him? I'm like so over this guy.
Many of you will have noticed that I refer to the book and deviations from the book to make my point, which under normal circumstances would be cheating, but in this case it's different, because Stanley Kubrick was very upfront about what his intentions for making the movie were, and about what the purpose of the changes was. In this interview, Kubrick states that he made the film because he fell in love with a number of period stories, but felt that Barry Lyndon was the only one that could be successfully compressed. That Kubrick wanted to make the movie because he loved the book was very recently confirmed by Jan Harlan in an interview for the 40th anniversary of Barry Lyndon. In the above mentioned interview, Kubrick is asked a number of times why he made this or that change to the story. And to rephrase Kubrick, changes were made to shorten the story and to keep in line with its themes at the same time. I suggested before that the novel pushes the psychologically nativist or determinist themes a bit farther than the movie. Important examples to that extent would be that in the novel, Barry believes the Lyndons ruined his ancestors, the Chevalier is Barry's long-lost uncle, who's similar to Barry in character, Barry taking on the son of Quinn and Nora, who then schemes against him, like Quinn did. Incidentally, when Barry learns about the betrayal, he throws a water bottle at the head of Quinn's son, which can hardly be called subtle, considering that he flung wine into Captain Quinn's face before. In the novel, Barry also sends Bullingdon to live with the Bradys to make him fall in love with one of the girls there, like he did when he was about the same age. But of course it's not working. It is important to note, however, that the novel is predominantly narrated by Barry himself, and that his descriptions of his life are based upon memory and have to be taken with a grain of salt. The determinist aspects of Barry's story are clearly used as a justification for his somewhat cruel actions in the novel. Here it is important to note that Barry is a much more evil character in the novel. He, for example, forcibly marries one of Lady Lyndon's friends to his cousin Ruhig, threatens to kill several people, and blackmails Lady Lyndon into marrying him, almost killing one of her suitors in the process. This aspect of the novel, along with the first-person narration, was present in Kubrick's screenplay, furthering the impression that he set out to be faithful to the novel. Studying Barry Lyndon in depth has definitely been interesting, although somewhat time-consuming. At least I'm now more confident in my distaste for the, in my opinion, somewhat far-fetched ending of AI.
People assume that Stanley ended AI with David and Teddy underwater, trapped by the Ferris wheel, and that end credits roll. And they're going to be down there until their batteries run out. That's where they assume Stanley ended it, and I, of course, get criticized for carrying the film 2,000 years into an advanced future where the robots they recreated have replaced us, and super mechas rule the world, and it's become a silicon-based society, no longer a carbon-based society. And they certainly assume that that's how I wrecked Stanley's movie, when in fact Stanley's treatment, along with Ian Watson, went right into the 2,000-year future. And this was where Stanley was going to take the movie had he lived to direct it. And this is where I was obligated to take the picture.
Kubrick, of course, frequently changed pre-planned endings. The pie fight ending of Dr. Strangelove and the hospital scene ending of The Shining come to mind immediately, but Barry Lyndon had also quite a different ending in both the novel and screenplay, in which Barry ends up in jail.
Drop that motherfucker.